Everyone, and welcome. And I'm very excited to introduce our guest, who is going to be talking about health and wellness Judaism. And I'll let him explain what that means in detail. But I want to tell you a little bit about him. He's Levi Brackman, Rabbi Levi Brackman, who has 3 rabbinic ordinations. What, only 3? Come on, what's up with that? A PhD in psychology and a master's in Judaic studies from University College in London. He is also the lead author of the book Jewish Wisdom for Business Success, which was published in 8 languages and was a bestseller in more than 1 country. He was a congregational rabbi for more than 15 years, and has also led data science at Fortune 500 companies. He's currently CEO and founder of, I don't know how to say it, is it Invown or Invone? Invone, a startup innovating in the home finance space. He lives with his wife and children in New Haven and is a proud member of Becky. And I'm very pleased to turn over tonight's session to Rabbi Brackman.
Thank you. In America, actually, it's not right to call yourself doctor if you've got a PhD, and if you're not practicing as a rabbi, you don't call yourself rabbi either, apparently. So I'm just Levi. So
just Levi.
Yeah. So I want to talk about health and wellness Judaism. Thank you for letting me. I appreciate that, Shoshana, and for setting this up. Why do I care about this? And so a little bit of background, like how I came to this concept of health and wellness Judaism, is part of the story I'm going to tell. You've already said who I am and what I've done. So, but basically, I was a rabbi for many years, and I realized that actually there wasn't much of a market for what I was selling. Trying to sell Judaism to the American Jew was very, very, it was an uphill battle. It was selling them something that they either didn't know that they needed or that they didn't need at all. So I started thinking about why is this and what is going on? One of the big wake-up calls for me was this 2013 Pew study. And if you recall this was like, everyone's forgotten about it, I think, but it really kind of created shockwaves throughout the Jewish world, because you have these big kiruv movements and other kinds of movements in Judaism, and billions of dollars spent to try and what they call stem the tide of assimilation. And not only has none of this money moved the needle at all, it's actually gotten a lot worse. As you can see, 58% of have a non-Jewish spouse. I'm not even sure if that is even a problem, but let's consider that a barometer of assimilation. It's still up from 43% in 1990, 17% in 1970. 30% of Jews in America have no denominational identity. For the conservative movement, it's actually pretty poor. It's pretty dismal. It's actually getting a lot worse. The conservative movement, people are running away from conservative Judaism. Only 36% of people who were born conservative actually remain conservative. Think about the Orthodox, it's like 90% remain Orthodox. 73% of Jews being Jewish is just about remembering the Holocaust. I mean, it's just a negative connotation. 90% of Jewish adults surveyed say observing Jewish law is, they actually say it's not. I don't know why I said it is. It's not essential to being Jewish. So the concept of like some kind of ritualistic Judaism is not part of being Jewish. Only 19% say it is, which means that 81% think it's not. And 46% say being Jewish is very important to them, which means like 54% don't think it's important. And less than 1/3 of American Jews say they belong to a synagogue. So there's a lot more to that survey, but just these are some of the highlights of it. And I'm sure in the last 8 years, it hasn't gotten better. Right? I think probably the trend has gotten, the trend is not our friend in this regard. So I got thinking, like, what's going on here? Why is Judaism so unappealing to Jews? And by the way, it's not just Jews. When I used to speak to my Catholic colleagues and even my evangelical colleagues, they found the same thing. Like, people out there are just not that interested in religion anymore. And religion is just not appealing to people. And the people who is very appealing to are usually the people who are somewhat less, how can I say, it's not appealing to young educated people. Let's say that it's less appealing to young educated people, and people are finding communities in lots of other ways which weren't available back in the day, and they're not finding it in synagogues or in churches, etc. So this isn't just a Jewish thing, although it's very acute for Jews. It is a religion thing in general. And it's something which we would like to ignore, but I don't think we can, because or else we end up presiding, our generation ends up presiding over the death of Judaism, which I don't think should happen. And it turns out, I believe then, I'm no longer a leader in the Jewish community, but I believe then as a leader in the Jewish community, we were asleep at the wheel. And it was a lack of leadership, which is really causing this. And I'll try and explain how that then came around to this concept of health and wellness Judaism. So as I was looking at this, I was studying psychology and getting my PhD in psychology, and I got to know these two people, Rich Ryan and Ed Deci. Rich Ryan and Ed Deci, they are the grandfathers, if you like, of this very well validated theory in psychology called self-determination theory. Is anyone familiar with it? It's one of the most well-studied and most well-validated theories of human motivation. And it basically posits that in order for people to really feel motivated, they need to have the following 3 psychological needs met. Number 1, a sense of autonomy. And autonomy really means people feel total agency in what they're doing. And interestingly, in autonomy itself, they separate into these 2 things called intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, right? And then they have a whole study on religious motivation, and they have this thing called introjected religious motivation, together with internalized, I think they call it internalized religious motivation. And basically, so these differences in motivations are really key and important. And I want to just talk a little bit about internalized religious motivation versus identified religious motivation versus introjected religious motivation. And this thing called, so the first type of religious motivation is where you feel that your religion really is a part of who you are and your identity. You feel at one with the ideas that your religion actually teaches you. Introjected religious motivation is more like, I do it because I'm scared I'm going to go to hell if I don't do it. I'm scared that I'll be an outcast in my community if I don't do it. This is what my parents expect of me, and therefore I do it. I go to synagogue because I want to make my grandmother happy, etc. Right? That's introjected religious motivation, right? Identified religious motivation is I really truly identify with what this is. And what I found, what they found with introjected religious motivation was that if you have introjected religious motivation, you're much more likely to be an extremist. You're much more likely to be intolerant of other people. And you're much more likely to kind of try and impose your views upon others. Whereas if you have identified religious motivations, you don't have those issues. You're going to be more tolerant. You're going to be nicer. As a matter of fact, I put together this was years ago, back in 2011, like 10 years ago, I put together a proposal to the Department of Justice to do a wholesale study about religious motivation. And I was proposing that we would create a ability to identify those who teach religion in an introjected type of way, and that would kind of enable us to find extremists and people who are radicalizing people on the internet, which at that time was a big problem. Now we have other radicalizations, which are a bigger problem, but that I'm sure that's still a problem. Anyway, they didn't accept my proposal, although it did go to the full panel. But the idea here is that introjected religious motivation is a part of religious motivation. Identified religious motivation is the best type of motivation that we would be looking for. A sense of competence is also, vitally important. People need to feel competent about what they do. You're not motivated if you don't feel competent. If you go to work and you just don't feel competent about what you're doing, you're not going to feel motivated about going to work. And then relatedness is this key thing that you need to feel that you have a sense of community around what you're doing. You kind of feel a sense of belongingness with these other people that you're doing it with. And, you know, if you study self-determination theory and you see the kind of things that Rich Ryan and Ed DC are doing, they're actually also hired by big corporations to help them figure out how to put these three fundamental human needs into the workplace. But certainly we, as in the religious context, we need to really be thinking very carefully, I believe, about these three things: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And how do we have that in a community? Are we offering that as a religion? And if we're not, well, there's probably good reason why people aren't motivated to show up. And one of the things I used to argue quite a bit was, you know, if I was Apple and no one wanted to use my phones or my Mac, I have, you know, or my computers, then I just say, well, the whole world's are just, they're all morons because they don't get how good my computers are. It doesn't matter. I still will stop being a company pretty soon, right? The genius of someone like Steve Jobs was that he understood that the product has to be so seamless, so beautiful, and so easy to use that everyone's going to want to just use it because it just delights the customer. It seems like religions, all they want to do is they want to say, oh, you need to come to the synagogue, and if you don't come to the synagogue, you know, we're going to try and guilt you into it somehow, or, you know, you ought to feel the sense of responsibility to be part of this community or to be part of continuing this wonderful legacy and heritage, which is called being Jewish. And like, but why? You know, that, you know, no company could ever survive having that kind of attitude about that's their customers. And there's no reason why, frankly, a Judaism in the 21st century should expect to survive if that's how it treats the next generation. So I realized that we need to have a radical shift about how we think about presenting Judaism to people. And when I thought about like this, think about this, like competence, especially in a synagogue like Becky or the synagogue which I was running, you know, people showed up like, do people feel competent in the synagogue? No, it's a spectator sport, right? Most people, I'm not talking about the regulars who know the Hebrew, etc. Yes, they feel competent. That's one of the reasons they show up. But the average person who comes from the outside, doesn't know the Hebrew, they're completely fish out of water, right? There's no competency there at all. They just kind of completely feel lost. Even if you tell them the page numbers, doesn't really help. They're still like, it doesn't really help. And you know, it might be, the translation might be in the book. Still, it is difficult to really get into the press. You need to have done it for a while to really understand it. Relatedness. Do people who just come in, are they going to walk into the synagogue and feel a sense of belonging, that they feel this is my community? And autonomy, like, why do they show up there? Do they feel like they did it on their own, or is it just for the bar mitzvah? Right? So these are questions we need to ask. I think if you look around, the average person you're trying to attract into the synagogue, are they going to have the average new person who shows up? I'm not talking about someone who comes from a background who's always gone to synagogue, or someone like me. I came from a very, very Orthodox background. It's obvious to me. I'm talking about someone who's come from just the average Jew out there, right? Not the 36% who remain conservative, but the rest of them. Try and bring them into the synagogue. Are they feeling these three things? My answer mostly was they weren't. And, you know, I'm sure we can debate this vigorously afterwards, but this was that was the conclusion I came to. And so I look back at history and I realized that all Jewish leaders in history, what they really did was they constantly changed and progressed and evolved Judaism, right? The Judaism which exists today, even the most Orthodox version of it, is nothing compared to the Judaism of Moses or Samuel or, you know, or even Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, or Ravina and Rav Ashi, or even Sadia Gaon. It's just like, you know, just went through, 1,800 years of Jewish history right then, and the Judaism we have today is nothing like any of those. Even in its most orthodox, version. And so when you look at the history, you look at, rabbinic Judaism post-temple destruction, the rabbis radically changed Judaism. They completely changed it. They took it from a temple-centric religion to a synagogue-centric religion. They took it from a religion where they offered up animals as part of serving God to one in which they chanted words, right? They took it from a priesthood-centric religion and a religion which was run by priests and kings and prophets, to one which was run by scholars. It was complete change that took place out of necessity. If Judaism was going to survive, they needed wholesale change of Judaism. And then you see that continued, right? Medieval Jewish philosophy. You see Saadia Gaon, who came in, up to Maimonides. They saw this zeitgeist which took place. Philosophy was becoming, you had Philo back in the Temple times, that's true, but that wasn't really part of the zeitgeist in Temple times. It became very, very important, as part of Sufism and other things that were taking off at the time. And the rabbis jumped on it and brought it inside as part of Judaism, up to Gersonides, right? Then you had Kabbalah and Pietism, right, which also took on. Where did the Kabbalah come out of? There was no mention of this kind of Jewish mysticism prior to 1200s, and people like Moshe de Leon, who wrote the Zohar. That took off, right? And that had an unbelievably powerful impact on Judaism. Non-Kabbalistic Judaism, like the whole Rabbi Joseph Cairo, who ended up writing the Shulchan Aruch, he basically took Kabbalah and established it within Jewish practice, that which didn't exist prior, and made lots of things much more important in Judaism, which almost didn't exist prior. So Kabbalah had a massive impact in changing Judaism. Shamanism with the Balei Shem, up to Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem, who became allegedly the founder of the Hasidic movement, and then Hasidism, which again radically reshaped Judaism in a way in which is not to be underestimated. And the fact that you had the Mitnagdim who opposed Hasidism was because they opposed that radical change and shift that would take place because of Hasidism. Hasidism ended up winning the day, and they changed Judaism massively. And I would argue the reason for that was because, again, they tapped into a philosophical and a mystical zeitgeist that was taking place at the time, which made it very, very popular. The same thing was happening with the Enlightenment, people like Abraham Geiger, people like Moses Mendelssohn, etc. So it just Judaism continued to evolve. Judaism is this evolving thing. No matter, you can deny it if you're very orthodox. It doesn't matter if you deny it, it's still a fact. The Judaism that you're practicing today as a chassid in Borough Park or in Williamsburg is nothing like the Judaism even of 250 years ago, of the time of the Pietists. It was a different Judaism with different values. So it's evolved, it's changed. And look at Judaism today. For some reason, we think that the world is changing much more rapidly, and therefore we're looking over how many, this is 2,000 years of Judaism, of these changes. We can look back and we can say these periods of time, they were relatively slow changes, but the world has evolved much, much, much more quickly over the last 100 years. Judaism has just not kept up with it. It needed to have made lots of iterations, and it just doesn't. And there are people who hold it back. And I think that it's a lack of leadership, collective lack of leadership within Judaism, which hasn't seen this and has just not been fast enough with the changes to keep up with, some of the trends and changes in society. So this is kind of what I observed. This is the backdrop, if you like, to how I came up with this concept called health and wellness Judaism. And I'm not saying that health and wellness Judaism is the answer to all things, or even that it's particularly clever. It's just maybe one way of thinking about how we can maybe make Judaism a little bit more relevant to people who live in the 21st century. So, I can stop for a second. This is kind of, I think I've said quite a bit. Anyone comments or disagreements? So I'm happy to, before we move on to what it is.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
You just said that there were trends and things going on now or recently that you don't think that Judaism is in fact evolving to recognize or to integrate. So can you give us an example of what some of those things might be that you particularly see?
Well, look, it's interesting that you have like what the pandemic has caused is this huge evolution from, this thing of inside the synagogue. I personally don't like it, right? But I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. This thing, which it was very synagogue centric, to now Judaism basically going online, that would never have happened without the pandemic. I think it's a good thing. It should have been offered before. Judaism as a whole did not embrace this concept of, you had Coursera, for example, which took learning online, and Udemy and these other kind of concepts. Judaism just never offered anything similar, really. Chabad was doing a little bit of it, but really, like the kind of like the communal Judaism didn't really offer it. It's now offering it more because of the pandemic. That may be one example of trends that we're seeing, but also in the zeitgeist, right? The fact is, I think that, religion and concepts around religion for a lot of people are no longer, the old way of thinking about religion are just no longer attractive to people. People want something which is, I think although it's funny because we've seen in the Trump era, this kind of anti-science movement, which has reared its head. So this is kind of, a lot of this thinking is prior to the Trump era. So who knows whether some of it, we're going backwards a little bit, I think. But some of the progression of like, people care about the scientific approach, and people, they take things, it was only 100 years ago where the wise man was the person who everyone went to for wisdom and for knowledge, the source of knowledge. People don't go to the wise man anymore for knowledge. They'll go to Google Scholar, or they'll go to some other kind of reputable place which is backed by real evidence. People seek that out as knowledge. Having not acknowledging that, I think is problematic, and not kind of recognizing and that somehow Judaism has something to say in that space as well is also kind of problematic.
Okay.
But I don't know. Have you seen anything?
Now, I'm not going to be that picky, and I mean, I am in my personal life, and there are things I see, and I have grown children, of course, who make different decisions. So I've seen, I just don't know that's, I was curious as to the kinds of things you were talking about. I have an idea now. I don't want to, I don't want to stop your talk to get distracted off another thing. We can talk more about it another time. Thank you.
Sure. All right.
Yeah, I didn't have any other questions that people, so I would just keep going.
Okay. So this is where health and wellness Judaism, I think, came in, and I thought it had some like really nice properties to it, if you like. I felt that it was authentically Jewish. It was something which 21st century Jews could relate to intrinsically. It had a scientific rationale behind it. It's actually good for you from an empirical perspective. It was in line with the zeitgeist. Health and wellness is something, which a lot of people really care about. At least when I was in Colorado, people did. I don't know, maybe on the East Coast it's slightly different, but I think it is a trend that people care about things related to health and wellness. It brings a sense of inherent competence with it. People, it talks that language, and also it brings a sense of, it shouldn't say East, it should say a sense of relatedness. People can find community around it. So those were the nice properties I found about it, and I thought that, well, what is it? So I started looking at, within Judaism, and there are a lot of things which Judaism actually has inherent in it, which are really wise. They're really smart. And actually, we now have evidence that they're actually good for you. So let's start with Shabbat, right? Shabbat really is, what is Shabbat? I mean, Shabbat is really like this island in time where, you don't think about last week and you don't think about next week, and you're present. You're not supposed to think about things outside of Shabbat. You're not supposed to really do things outside of Shabbat. I'm not saying that, we're perfect at it, but it's really like a day of mindfulness, a day of being present, a day of letting go of one's anxieties. Really, if you read Samson Raphael Hirsch on this, it's really interesting. He talks about like the whole concept of Shabbat is kind of letting go of one's creative energies and letting it just be, right? If you like, appreciating that you're not really the creator, there is a creator, who's outside of you, right? Which is kind of really interesting, right? I think. So stop trying to influence the world and just let the world be and appreciate nature, appreciate the world around us. And there's a lot of evidence to show that doing this regularly once a day, certainly for 24 hours a week, would be very, very helpful. As a matter of fact, I was talking at one point about setting up an academic study where we would do mindfulness, a full day of mindfulness once a week, and see the positive health outcomes that would come about from it. Would have been a very expensive study, and we just weren't able to do it. But I was talking with some colleagues about doing that. But this is a concept of everyone knows mindfulness is really powerful. It's inbuilt in Judaism as a whole day once a week of Judaism. Now, it's never really presented as that. Shabbat is presented as this day very often that, you have to do this and you can't do that and you can't do the other and you can't do the other. And, if it could be presented in a way where actually there's evidence to show that this is really beneficial, it could be very powerful. The other thing is interesting that I didn't put in here, but I thought I'd mention it, that the rituals of Judaism, right, are really interesting. A lot of the rituals of Judaism, because if you think about the concept of habit, there's a lot of talk in the literature about habit and how, breaking bad habits and how habits are formed, etc. A lot of the rituals of Judaism, you're ritualizing actual good habits, right? So if you think about mindfulness, actually ritualizing it actually brings that into your life and makes it to be something that you just do habitually. Eventually it becomes like part of second nature to you. And that rituals themselves, some people think are negative, but actually there's a lot of literature which shows that when you habitualize something and it becomes a ritual, which happens through ritual, it actually can be a very positive thing. This is obviously, kashrut, right? Kashrut gets a really bad rap, and maybe for good reason, because if you go to Borough Park or go to Israel with all the good kosher food, I mean, you get very fat and very unhealthy off kosher food nowadays. I think that in many ways that kind of takes away some of the inner meaning of what kashrut is really about, which is just being very mindful of what you ate. Back in the days, the ancient Semites, back in the time in the desert, what were they doing? They were just being very mindful about what they ate. They were thinking about, what kind of animal is this? How am I slaughtering it, etc. If you like the pnimiyut, the inner part of kashrut is really about being very mindful about what you eat. And there's a lot of evidence which shows that if you're mindful about what you eat, that's actually very good for you. Encourages healthier weight and healthy eating habits. So mindfulness of what you eat, that's really kashrut. Sukkot is another really cool one, right? This whole concept of appreciating and spending time outdoors. I mean, there's a lot of evidence which shows that it's really, really good for you in multiple ways of just spending time outdoors. And a lot of us spend a lot of our day, especially through COVID, time indoors. Sukkot, it's a whole week you're spending time outdoors. Now, again, modern day Judaism has kind of ruined this for us, because if you're wealthy, you just make a hole in your dining room and you never go outside, and you just got like a roof which kind of moves, but really the concept is you go outside your house and you spend that time in the great outdoors and you appreciate that. And I remember when we brought a speaker when I was a rabbi about this, and who was an expert in the outdoors, and she spoke for a whole hour about all the benefits of being outdoors, and it's really staggering how important that is. So, in Judaism we have evidence to show that this very, very overlooked holiday called Sukkot is actually trying to tell us, get outdoors sometimes. And then there's the obvious stuff, which is charity, helping others. A lot of evidence that giving charity and helping others is very good for you. Being grateful, there's a huge amount of evidence. We could go on and on, right? There's so much stuff, right, which shows that there's real health and wellness benefits, evidence-based health and wellness benefits for these things. Passover, it should really be shown. I mean, this week is the parasha of Shemot starts talking about this whole concept of being enslaved. You celebrate this ability to really be a free person, to have real autonomy. Autonomy is really important. Feeling a sense of autonomy, as we discussed, is so important. Having a sense of true agency is really important for being a healthy person. So, I mean, you take all these things and you realize that, you know, Judaism isn't really just a religion of rituals and a religion of do's and don'ts. It's actually a religion which is full of tremendous amount of wisdom and a tremendous amount of things which are built into it, which actually, if you followed, would really be healthy for you. And if you're mindful and aware that that is what it really is trying to do for you, it should be relatively appealing to the modern person who cares about their health. And so if you're able to present it in a way, and this, again, this is what Maimonides was doing with the Guide to the Perplexed. This is what, you know, the rabbis, the rabbinic Jews were doing after the destruction of the temple, in my view. This is what the Baal Shem Tov was doing with shamanism. Well, shamanism didn't exist within Judaism. It hasn't existed since. How did all of a sudden this guy become a shaman? He became a shaman because other religions had shamans and Jews wanted shamans. So he became a shaman. I mean, that's how Judaism has always worked. They looked at what was going on the outside and what other people were attracted to, and they realized we better find something within ourselves which makes them attracted to it too, or else they're going to run away. For some reason, Jews don't think that way today in the 21st century. We ought to, and this might be a way of doing it. So this is what I did. And this was, this was back 2015, 2016, so this was a while ago. I put together a whole program called Health and Wellness Judaism. And we had the Health and Wellness Shabbat. And basically we had and again, I'm not saying anyone should do this. I'm just sharing with what we did and what was the thinking behind it. But, you know, I cut down the service like massively. I actually said, you know what, anyone who wants to come to do a full service, we'll do it. And we'll do it in 60 to 90 minutes. If you want to show up for that, good for you. Right. But you don't have to. Those who really care about that should show up for it. But that's between 8:30 and 10 o'clock. Right. And then it's done. 10 o'clock, you know, we started with a short, meaningful prayers in Hebrew and English. Everyone sat around in a circle. We drummed it out and we sang it through. Then we made Kiddush and we had a healthy snack. We did a mindfulness meditation. And sometimes if it was nice outside, I had a mindfulness teacher who came and took us all on a mindfulness walk. You know, we got quite a few people who showed up for this, you know, and we also had a health and wellness kiddie service, right? Where the kids did a mindfulness meditation and mindfulness teaching from the Torah. And we did that, you know, for a while. And this was kind of my last throes of being a rabbi. So, you know, after a while, I left being a rabbi, so I didn't continue it. But for what it was relatively successful. And that's how we actually applied it. And that more or less is my spiel. I thought, you know, any thoughts or ideas, or maybe there's a better way to apply what Judaism exists. What I'd like you to take away with, if anything, is not to do health and wellness Judaism, although I'm open for that. It's something I care about. But what we need to take away with this is what it's very normal within Judaism to say that what are people enjoying and appreciating outside in the general culture? How can we take something from within Judaism, which is going to be both authentic and applicable to them and their lives, and therefore bring them in? Instead of saying to them, you need to be part of Judaism and giving them the guilt trip if they're not. That's what really is what I would like, you know, if anything's going to be taken away, it should be that.
Thank you very much. Our first question, I think it was from Ruth Silver. Ruth, unmute yourself, please.
Levi, I was concerned earlier. You weren't emphasizing the spiritual. Finally, you got to the spiritual, and this is Buddhism. This has been, and I'm glad. This is where it has to go. It has to be holistic. It has to be mindful. It has to be aware. It has to be attention. So I'm glad you finally approached it. I was very impatient for you to get to the spiritual aspect.
Okay.
Okay. So you actually answered her question already.
Yes.
Right.
the mind, but this comes from a different tradition, really. I guess it comes from our tradition, but maybe we haven't been familiar with it.
Yeah, well, hasn't been presented as such. That's my argument. I don't think this is Buddhism, although, you know, I love Siddhartha and those types of books as much as anybody else does.
Oh, no, we have we have a lot of people on YouTube with this
Okay.
mindfulness, right? But
Yeah, but I think, like, what is Shabbat if it's not mindfulness?
Betsy, did you want to make your comment aloud, or you just,
Okay, sure. I belong to two shows, and now that I'm doing Reform and Conservative, as you're speaking, I'm thinking how the Reform movement, in my particular case down the street in Orange, has embraced exactly what you're talking about. So it feels like it's contemporary. It's taking and cultivating and integrating the times. What's happening out there that works for people to spiritually connect them to God and to source, whatever you want to call it. I just got goosebumps when you started to state all this, because it's there for the taking. It's just a question of how we can integrate it into the conservative soul as well. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, I find interesting, like, I don't think of Reform Judaism as having done that, though.
Well, it does over one particular show. You're right. I can't say all Reform. I take it back. Temple Emmanuel in Orange.
No, I think what, and this might be controversial, but one of the reasons why, although if I'm going to any synagogue, I wouldn't go. I like Reform, but I wouldn't go there, is because I feel that they just tried to kind of make Judaism into they basically looked at, they didn't like try to kind of take what's authentically Jewish, I felt. Instead, they looked at Protestant Christianity, and that's just basically said, let's try and recreate Judaism like to be a Protestant. It's a Christian. That's how I felt it. That's, you know, I didn't feel like it had taken the authentic parts of Judaism and seeing how it could be relevant to. But I might be wrong. That's just how I feel about it.
Thank you. Just 1 second. Okay. I think I'm just checking to see. Yeah, Cynthia had a comment. Cynthia, want to unmute?
Yeah, I'm unmuting here.
Okay.
I wanted to say that when we have our services in the parking lot, which essentially, you know, happens on Shabbat, and it's the only time I go. I'm one of the people who doesn't go inside, but I've been very aware of nature while we're there, that you can be looking at the trees, and for me, that's really meaningful, the bringing nature in. So just mention that. My sister's synagogue, which is a Reform synagogue, and at another time, I'd like to defend Reform Judaism, which I grew up Reform, but they actually have big windows behind the bima, so that the nature is brought in too. So I found that really important, very moving, and something that also I go to Japan every year. And something that is very prevalent in Buddhist temples is, you know, how much nature there is all around.
Yeah, I by the way, I just want to make clear, I'm not criticizing Reform Judaism at all. I'm just saying that I don't think they did this. They did something different to make it relevant. I'm just saying I don't think
that may have been true at the outset.
Yeah.
I don't think it's true of what exists today.
That
but
might be correct.
The real part of my comment is being outside has been, of course, a mixed blessing. So the silver lining is that we all get to be in nature, even when we're after dark in the courtyard. We're aware of the elements. Oh, it's cold tonight. It's over the stars. It's a completely different relationship to the world. That's
I'd actually like to follow up on that comment, if I may. One of the things I found really, I guess, helpful in some ways in the midst of the pandemic was I started going to the Shabbos parking lot minyan. I guess it was the end of June that things started, and just watching the seasons change in the parking lot, because Shabbos morning when you're inside, I mean, you might notice when you're walking, but to actually like be sitting there davening for like an hour and a half and watch from like the heat of the sun and appreciating the shade of the trees to watching the trees change color to watching the trees go bare. And just even watching like how the sun moves over a period of 6 months across the parking lot gave me a very different appreciation. It's not that I'm not aware of those things in my daily life on some level, but I have never taken the opportunity, never mind had, but taken the opportunity to really just put myself in the same place week after week and watch how the seasons actually change. And that in and of itself was a spiritual experience.
Thanks. Donna, you have your hand raised, but unless it's following this line, somebody else had requested to ask a question first.
Go ahead.
Is it about this same topic?
Not, it's
Okay.
on his topic, but it's, you could, I can wait.
Okay. So Jay, actually, I think Jay, you were next. You had a question?
Yeah, thank you for doing this, Levi. I appreciate it. As you're going through your talk, it reminded me of that story of the blind people who are describing an elephant, and one describes the ear, and one describes the tail, and one describes the leg, and they're all right, but they're all missing the big picture.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, I agree that you can find these aspects in Judaism, but none of the things that you pointed to, except maybe for the mindfulness for Shabbat, none of them really seem like the essence to me. And I don't know if that matters, because maybe we take what we want from it. But if I came from looking at the tradition, I think I have a different experience than you're describing for a lot of these events.
Without a doubt. Absolutely. And then anyone who would be listening to me from any who came from a traditional or Orthodox background, or even a conservative background, would think that what I'm saying is sacrilege. And so I completely agree, because they would say, what? Judaism is so much deeper than that. It's about God, and it's about connecting to God, and it's about, your neshama, and, it's about, the essence of your soul. And they would. But the reality is, that's not selling out there. That's what I'm saying. In other words, what I'm trying to say is like, that's all good for certain people, and it works very, very well for 10% of Jews, and that 10% of Jews in America, that's a lot of people, even 15%. But for the preponderance of people, it doesn't talk to them. And what you find is that doesn't really, it doesn't work. It's not selling, so to speak. It's not a product which people are buying. So yeah, of course. Yeah, you're right. I mean, for a lot of people, this is just going to feel hollow. People who already come to shul and daven in Hebrew and, love all that, this is going to ring hollow for them. But that same thing which works for those people it's not, the population out there are not buying it.
Can I follow up on that comment for a second? And this is not meant to be argumentative. It really is a question, okay? And that is, why does it matter? In other words, is the point to get as many Jews in the world as possible, and why? In other words, what difference does it make if other people aren't buying it, if it's meaningful for you or for those in a community for whom it's important? Is it a commodity, or is it a choice of a way of life? Are we selling a truth, or are we have we found a structure that in some way just works for inculcating values that we hold, that we who make that choice choose to live by? So in terms of the language that you're using, like, people aren't buying it out there.
Yeah.
And I'm not arguing with you. My question is, why is it important that people buy it out there?
Because it's valuable. In other words, like,
But lots of things are valuable. Diamonds are valuable, but I don't have a
Well,
chest full of them.
well, no, it depends on your perspective, right? It depends on your perspective. So I'll give you an example. My wife's grandfather is the president of a synagogue in London. The guy's in his 90s, bless him. And he's ensured that nothing's changed in that synagogue because he loved it exactly the way it was. And it went from a thriving synagogue when he was in his 50s. And now basically it's him and a couple of his old friends who come together on the Shabbat. And he had the same attitude. Why would I change anything? I love it here. This is meaningful to me. And the synagogue will, hopefully he continues living for a very long time, but it will die with him. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that the question is like, it's this age-old question. It works for me, so why should I don't want to change it? On the one hand, the other hand,
I didn't say I don't want to change it. I'm asking.
What I was trying to show, the argument I was trying to make by showing throughout history, Jewish leaders have come, the leaders, not the people, have come and said, I am going to show a different face of Judaism. I am going to make significant changes, which are authentic at the same time, authentic to Judaism. That's my argument. It has to be authentic to Judaism. You can't just say, I'm going to make it to be close to what people like. So I'm just going to have a gym on Shabbat morning, and everyone's going to go running on the treadmill because that's what people like to do on a Saturday morning. Or we're going to have, we're going to get a boys club together and we're going to build a car kit. No, it has to be something authentic to Judaism, right? On the one hand, truly authentic to Judaism, but also is going to relate to the Hamonam, as they call it, the regular people out there. What I'm trying to argue is that Jewish leaders throughout the centuries have done that. That's what they've done in order to be. We're enjoying Judaism today because they did that.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead, Donna. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So both Daryl and Jay are more scholarly and involved than I am. So I'm buying what you're saying, hook, line, and sinker. Okay, and I'm curious about a few things. One is, where in Colorado did you have a congregation? Was it Boulder or?
No, it was Evergreen.
Okay, so because I have relatives out there and I lived out there for a while, and I know it's more of a touchy-feely kind of place,
right.
and health and wellness. But so I wondered if you did this every Shabbat or whether this was like a periodic thing. And if it was a periodic thing, like a monthly thing or whatever, like Tat Shabbat or something, whether there were other topics besides health and wellness or in addition to health and wellness that you also found to be good entry points. And what I will say in response to Daryl is my son read the book Here All Along. You've probably, I don't know if you've seen that. It was, I forget her name, Michelle Obama's speechwriter wrote this book Here All Along, and that what they were looking for was in Judaism, and she got more and more involved. Well, I see this as a wonderful entry point for people who may then get deeper involved in the more traditional rituals and study and observance and whatnot. But as an entry point, I wonder how you did it, how often you did it, and whether there were other entry points that you sort of created.
So I did it once a month. That's the truth. It was like a pilot. I really did a pilot, and then I kind of, I basically, transitioned out from being a rabbi, went into corporate America. I started a full-time job as a data scientist at a big tech company in September 2016. So, which was,
I've got to ask why.
That's a different story. But the point is that I transitioned out of being a rabbi. I just didn't have the time to continue following it through. But I think that, so we did it once a month, and we did also a Friday night. We had a Friday night component to it, and we had a Shabbat day component to it. And the Friday night component was basically a much more in-depth talk at a Friday night dinner. And the Friday night dinner was a healthy dinner. It was, we had, made sure everything was healthy. It was interesting that one person brought a very healthy cookie made out of a certain plant, which is only legal in Colorado.
Was then.
On Friday night. And some people got upset about that. But the point is, like, it was supposed to be like a healthy, we had a healthy kind of dinner, which was, and then we had a speaker, like a real, what you would call like a academic, who would come and talk.
Were there other topics too, besides health and wellness? Did you do other or explore other approaches to Judaism that?
Well, previous iterations of programming I did, but for the health and wellness thing, no.
Thanks. Just a clarification, by the way, Donna and others who may have thought this. In my question to Levi, I was not implying that I do not hold by his perspective. Exactly the opposite. Okay. Yeah.
But I think when he's talking about bringing people in who aren't already deeply involved and knowledgeable, you have to exclude yourself.
Yeah, well, yes, okay. I have to exclude myself, and I am on just in an intellectual curiosity.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Philosophically, not intellectually. Philosophically, this is something that I have batted around myself, being a leader in the community. It's like, is there intrinsic value in the numbers? And does that mean, do the numbers mean that I or somebody else or the way that someone else is validating? And is there a larger truth to it? This is a little too philosophical probably to get into now.
But what I'm thinking about is, like, you want your kids to find something valuable in Judaism, and they don't think, most of them don't think the way we think. And this is another way that some of them may think. I mean, I have 3 kids, one of whom is exactly what he does. He turns off all his devices on Shabbat. He does, he's really into mindfulness and that part of Judaism. But he's also started doing Havdalah and a lot of other rituals that have started building up from that initial entree point. And then I have a daughter who likes very traditional Judaism, belongs to a very traditional conservative synagogue and likes it. And then I have one that I can't figure out what that entry point for her would be. Okay. And I think we all have a lot of those in the world, and not just children, but people who would like to see the value in Judaism to improve their lives.
Thanks. Shoshana, I think, was next with a question.
Yeah, I mean, mine is a little bit building, I guess, on what we've been talking about, but the idea of bringing people in the door and I understand that, and I do think that's a valuable thing. And then how do you keep people? Is it more health and wellness? Do you help them learn more about Judaism? Do you hope that they find the services meaningful? Or, or do they just come once a month for the wellness Shabbat? Or is there some other, because I'm like, I'm not that interested in I don't want to just bring people in. I want them to really be part of the community and feel comfortable. So I don't know if it's not really, it's kind of a question. Once you get them in the door, how do you keep them there?
Locks.
What's funny is that as I build my business, we ask this question, like, we want to get people in, new customers in, right? And then we want repeat propensity. It's called repeat propensity. And you want to figure out what the lifetime value of the customer is going to be. If they only shop once and don't buy anything, then, you've basically wasted all the money that you've used to bring them in through the door. Your customer acquisition cost is high and you've got no ROI. So you want them to actually come in and buy something, but you don't want them just to come once because you don't have to spend that money 10 times on new customers. You want to keep them engaged. And the tech world has done this really well. They have a really good way of doing it. It's called, they actually measure engagement, and they have gamification, and they have rewards which they give you. That's why you have like buttons on people like your stuff on Facebook. So that gives you some dopamine. I'm not saying this is what you should do, but I mean, like, this is something which has been very well studied in the tech world of how you keep people engaged in your product. And maybe there's something to learn from those guys. I don't have any answers. That's just my thought.
Thanks. I think actually, Jesse, I know you have your hand up. Is it about this point? You're on mute.
Yeah. Yes. Well,
It's about this. Okay.
Do we have time? I'm very just like you and everybody else here, and we're all interested in outreach. I think, shall I continue or do you not have time?
Yeah, I have time. It's just somebody had
Oh,
requested to make a comment. So
go
I didn't
ahead.
know if
Yes, let them do it. I'll come back.
No, go ahead. Go ahead and go ahead. And then,
So I think it's really what Shoshana is saying, and it's very interesting what Levi said. We used to have these discussions. We have these discussions all the time when I was on membership, and Mark Oppenheimer is really great at discussing it. First of all, it's no cost for us to go out and market because we're volunteers, and it is the value, the return is for us, the community, is that camaraderie, that feeling, that Yiddishkeit, whatever it is. I couldn't read Hebrew when I joined Becky, and I grew up in an Orthodox household. Just the girls were not educated. But I've gotten everything that I can find, everything that I need is here at Becky. That ability to learn to lane, to learn to read Haftarah, etc. But I was brought in, and so the hook was made. That comfort level. So what am I looking for? Health and wellness for sure. We had Robin Goldberg did on Shabbos afternoon. She would do mindfulness. We learned to meditate. There were many things, and we all sit around just like Shoshana and Daryl have been doing every week in finding schmoozes that'll draw us in. Yes, I agree with you that this pandemic, one of the only good things has been this camaraderie through Zooms, the topics that all mean a lot to us, and the ability to discuss this. So it's important. And I too, as being interfaith, have spent a lot of time with Hadassah and Zionist youth groups in outreach to interfaith families. I've seen how Chabad has done it very successfully. And their hooks and so on. So it's a bit different, and Levi, because you've lived all different lives already at your young age, that we don't talk about it in terms of hooks and the business language that you're using, but we talk about outreach, and we talk about giving comfort and building a community. And I've learned so much from Daryl, just watching her with Tikkun Olam. The young generation, or your generation, the millennials, they really want to participate in Tikkun Olam with the community, the whole greater community beyond our Jewish community. So it's very interesting. I think Becky is doing a good job. We, as a congregation, we have the biggest family group with young children, and it's growing. And part of it is the personality of those that draw you in. Mark Oppenheimer, others, even me dealing with other elderly, active elderly, whatever we are, elderly, vulnerable, I don't know, phase 1B, whatever we are now. We work hard on ways, and we're so very interested in what you have to say in trying to adjust. But I think our community is adjusting to a degree, having shorter services, which sometimes has been argued for on board meetings, and there's a lot of discussion. Maybe in retrospect, we'll be able to see how we have evolved. But all the things that you've been saying and that you've brought to us is really motivating for us to evaluate where we are and how to make sure we keep our community together and try to grow it. So I thank you for that. Just one quick question. What brought you to Becky? Sorry.
that's okay. It's just, I want to make sure that Sarah gets her comment in. No?
All right, I'll talk to you later.
No, that's
okay. We'll catch you and ask
We
you.
all want to
what
know
brought you to
now.
Becky.
Oh, no, we want to know.
Yeah.
We want to know. What
No,
brought
I
you to
think
Becky?
it's interesting that Becky is. I was brought up. My father. My background is my father was a chemist, had a PhD in chemistry. He wasn't really a pre-traditional Jew. My mother was very, very Orthodox, became Chabad, but my father never became. he took us to a United Synagogue in London, which is basically middle of the road. It sounds like you come from South Africa. So it's the kind of South African Orthodox synagogue which people would go to. The only difference between Becky and the synagogue I went to growing up was really that you have women leaning and there's no mechitza. The rest is almost identical to the kind of synagogue I went to growing up. And therefore, I personally feel very at home in that type of synagogue. Now, I brought people who went to normal Chabad synagogues to Becky and tried to get them in, and they don't feel at home at all because they never had that formative kind of experience of a more modern, middle of the road Orthodox type of synagogue. So I feel very comfortable at a place like Becky because it feels comfortable to me. That's, I think, probably the reason.
Well, go ahead.
No, that's all right. Sarah, did you not want to make your comment now?
No, it was just, I wanted to hear his answer first.
Okay. You want to go ahead then?
Yeah, so there's two things. One, I would say to you, Daryl, that I would say that you can't get to the truth if you only have a few people participate. So you want as many different people and as many different generations as you can, the larger group, to have a living, breathing community that survives for, hundreds of years.
If truth is what's important to you.
But what is the truth? And that's what you can't find. You don't know what truth is without everyone participating. You're only looking at that one side of the elephant. In order for the three men to gotten anywhere, they had to have gotten together and actually talk to each other and realize they were all seeing the same, different parts of the same thing. Anyway, and to Levi, I was going to say, my experience is people don't want to do the work that they need in order to really make Judaism their own, to make, to bring it in. They say they want community, but they don't want to do the work that you have to do to be part of a community. And it's just sort of, how did we get to this point where we think that it should be easy and automatic, and life isn't easy. It's not convenient, and that's just, but how did we get to the point where they think it should just be like the 30-minute television show and it's over in 30 minutes and everything works out fine?
I actually have a perspective on that, and I kind of alluded to it with what I mentioned about if you run a company like Apple and you basically say it's going to be really hard to use my product, you're going to go bankrupt, right? And you might be right that people ought to put in the effort to use the product. And if they did, they would gain so much benefit. But if you make it that hard for them to use, that's why, now you remember when many years ago, you would buy a Walkman and it came with a book this thick of telling you how to use it, right? Today, you show up with a phone, which is much more complicated than your Walkman ever was. And it has no, there's no book which tells you how to use, no instruction book. And the reason for that is because you don't need an instruction book. They've learned how to make products so intuitive that even a kid can pick it up and learn how to use it, right? They've taken all the complications out of it.
I don't
like it or not, that's what people expect.
Well, it's not that it's intuitive for the younger people because they've grown up with it. The older people don't find it that intuitive. We have a problem and it's like, oh, let's go get my 15-year-old son or my daughter to look at it. So but I mean, they could get a much more of a sense of community even if they would just put in one day a month, and it's like they don't even want to.
But look at Facebook. People are doing community on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. My son over COVID, right? He put out videos which got 1 million views on TikTok. He's got like nearly 20,000 followers on TikTok, right? That was a lot of effort on his part. I have a lot of respect for him. That wasn't easy, but TikTok managed to figure out how to get him to spend hours on it, engaging in it and creating community. He has a bunch of friends on TikTok. He plays Among Us with them. That's how he finds community. I think the health and wellness thing might be so passé of 2013. I am not suggesting everyone here just go pick it up and just take it on. Now, I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm trying to all I'm trying to say is that we need to kind of look around and say, you know, I'm an old man as well. I'm 42 years old. I'm not representative of the young people, right? I'm just saying that we need to think Judaism. I'm not really a leader in Judaism anymore. I'm really not. I don't consider myself to be, but I'm just telling you what my thought process was when I was.
So you're saying we need to figure out a way to get those,
I'm actually
those sorts of like those game happy feelings or whatever, you know, more instant gratification to keep us coming back.
I think this is a really hard problem. That's what I think. And it involves people who really need to think very deeply, very engagedly about it to try and figure out how to. And all I was sharing was my process of how I thought about it back when it was, you know, important to me to think about.
Right. I mean, it seemed clear to me that you weren't offering this as a better alternative than any other way of thinking about a Jewish life, a Jewish community that might make it more attractive and meaningful to people contemporaneously. And that it needs, as you said, needs to evolve with what's going on, mindful of what's going on with the larger community. And I would say to Jesse, and this has also related to something that you said, Levi. Jesse, you said it doesn't cost us anything because we're all volunteers and we do, okay? And I was surprised to hear that from you, because the fact of the matter is, those of us who work really hard as volunteers know that it costs a lot. It may not be in financially, but it costs an awful lot in creativity and in time and in effort and in computer time and time spent looking for materials to post on Facebook and all of the other things that everybody here, and designing flyers and all of the other things that people do, that costs us dearly because we are trying to sell something to the people we're trying to bring in, to a schmooze, to a service, to all the time that goes into making happenings every week. All of that is the cost of bringing in customers to this community. And so I don't think that people should think of it as, oh, but there is no cost of bringing in a customer here. There's a lot of cost. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'll get off my horse. And
quite right. I guess I was, yeah, I didn't view it as that, but you're quite right. Yeah, that sums it up well.
Okay, Margie has a question. She wants me to ask about the giraffe. What giraffe?
Oh, Martin had a giraffe.
Oh, Martin had a giraffe. Okay.
I was just pointing out that I'm the South African and
Jesse's the Australian.
Jesse's Australian.
Yes.
Same concept. Different animals.
It's
kangaroos and giraffes.
I don't know why I have so many comments today. I'm sorry. I don't usually impose myself quite this much. To Sarah, I would say, in terms of the issue of the hard work, I like Levi's approach, sort of bringing people in to find that meaning that immediately turns them on and brings them in and keeps them interested so that they will do the harder work, the work of studying Talmud and learning a way of thinking and of critical thinking that looks at the world in very specific and very different ways, and all of the other harder things. But people don't go to things because they're hard. They never did. They never will. They'll go because it draws them in, and then they're willing to dig deeper for the harder things. That's all.
Well, I mean, so people used to come because if nothing else, the Kiddush. They loved the Kiddush, and because there was so much talk of community. But then, you know, like trying to get them to do children's Habarah, and you could still hold their hand and help them out, but they didn't want to do the, show up once a month and sort of stumble through it, because you would learn more and you'd get better as you would go along. And it was just sort of like, so that would just be one example. But yeah, so I mean, what brought me in was the singing, because at the time I started, the Kiddush was just, and people used to stay for the Kiddush when it was just crackers and herring.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people.
And people. Yeah, people, definitely the people.
I have a question about people being involved. I mean, particularly in terms of like ritual leading, like for those of us who either can't carry a tune in a bucket without it sloshing out, or have a really difficult time with a second language, or just don't have the synagogue, in quote, synagogue skills. How do we make a place for those people to try their wings in a judgment-free zone? Because the couple of times I was ready to sort of try something like that, there would be a week when somebody stumbled during a Torah reading, or maybe didn't use the exact nusach somebody else thought was appropriate for Musaf. And comments would get made, and I'd go, okay, fine, I'm out of my depths. Like, is there a way we can figure out?
Well, one of the things I've seen at Becky is that, yeah, I can't carry a tune in a bucket or out of a bucket or anywhere. So I don't do that part. But, well, when I used to be able to stand for a long time, I was a fine greeter. Okay.
Well, right.
So that
I mean, it's like, turn me loose in the kitchen and we're fine. But
yeah,
what if,
so everybody
but what
has
if I
their
want to
own-
expand my skills? And how do I do that in a way that feels safe and nurturing? Because, yeah, I mean, I can wield a knife all day long and everybody will be happy, except I'm more than just knife wielding.
And yet I've, when people have stumbled and made a mistake, I'm always happy to hear that, because I feel like we're allowed to make mistakes.
I guess it depends on who you're hearing provide
Yeah.
the critique over Kiddush.
I think it
Yeah.
also depends on whether you're talking about, and if you're talking about davening skills, etc., ritual skills, I think there's also a difference at Becky between daily services and Shabbat or holidays. And I think as non-performative as we may like to think of ourselves, and as frankly as we really are compared to a lot of other places, I think there's an expectation with the larger congregation that people are coming into and I'm not, I don't know if I'm advocating for this or not, but I think there's an expectation that that the competence level is important because it's on Shabbat morning, that new people, as Levi was saying, new people are going to be coming to the congregation, and we want to put our best foot forward, and it makes people uncomfortable if a lack of competence is what's on display. And that's an uncomfortable way to describe it. But I really do think there's a difference at Becky in the expectation levels at daily services. And that's the place where people kind of try out their skills a little bit more.
If I may, it's interesting that we're talking about competence, because that one of the things you really need to allow people to feel like I was talking about from self-determination theory is that you need this kind of sense of competence in order to feel motivated.
Yeah.
If you don't feel competent, you're not going to feel motivated. Now, if only the elite feel competent, right, then you're going to have people aren't going to feel that they can actually ever get there. And therefore, somebody who's somewhat learned doesn't feel competent. What about the person who just shows up for the first time, doesn't know any Hebrew, which is the vast majority of Jews? They're definitely going to feel completely out of their depth. So unless you offer something which allows them to show up and feel competent,
yeah,
and unless you say I'm not saying we should. I mean, if you've got a closed club, you might say we only accept people who are competent. You know, go to any of the Chabad synagogues in New Haven. They don't care if you feel competent or not. You know, there's a closed club for a bunch of people, and they can all do it. You know, because that's what it is. It's a closed club, basically. But if you're looking to expand your horizons, and I'm not saying Becky should. I don't really have an opinion on it. I'm just saying, but if you are, you need to make sure it's more like that people can walk in. There's something that they can feel competent at beyond just wielding a knife in the kitchen. Yeah.
And I actually think that what was originally called the Learner's Minyan at Becky was in fact started for exactly that. I don't think it was started as a study, as purely a study group for Parshat Shavua. I think it really was a learning service, so people could learn about the service and could try out their skills. And I think it developed more into a discussion group. I don't know, because I haven't been to a learner's service in many, many, many years. But, you know, I think going back maybe to considering when we get together again, considering providing something like that again, because it was important enough for us to do it, might be something to consider.
We do have once a month, we're meeting with to talk about the prayers and the rest of it, to learn more about the prayers with Carol and I'm drawing a blank. Anyway, so the next meeting is at the end of this month. So if you're interested in that, you could zoom in on. We do this the hour before the schmooze.
Speaking of the schmooze.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm feeling a little protective.
We are kind of schmoozing on here.
Yeah, I feel like we're veering into a new topic, which we should think about.
Yes. Having a schmooze on.
Having a schmooze on. Levi, you have definitely stimulated, as you can see, a huge conversation and a really important one. And I think one that we all have on our minds, especially as we wonder about how we're going to transition eventually back to being at Becky, and if everybody will come out of the woodwork again. So, you know, that's something we are all thinking about. And does anybody have anything important they want to say before I wrap up? Because I just want to, oh, wow, look at all those hands. Jim?
Wow.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the Learner's Minyan, and it draws me in. And I don't think people fully realize that when Jane passed away, that the sense of community and the sense of acceptance at my level was very powerful in keeping me going. And so I appreciated that, a way of kind of drawing me in. And I only have one question for Rabbi Tilson, but you know, which congregation are you head of?
Which congregation are you head?
No, I'm just seeing this big Becky sign.
Yes.
Yeah. And Cynthia, did you have your hand up? No, okay. Levi, thank you so very much. This was really interesting and really obviously thought-provoking for all of us. And we may hit you up again as we continue this conversation further down the road. I just want to talk about next week's schmooze and tell you some details. Next week we have a discussion led by Jennifer Klein and Jim Berger about a documentary movie, Traces of the Trade. This is a feature documentary made in 2008. A filmmaker, Katrina Brown, discovers that her New England ancestors were the largest slave trading family in US history. And they were from Rhode Island.
Rhode Island.
Who knew? I didn't know. She and 9 cousins retraced the triangle trade and gained powerful new perspectives on the Black-White divide in America. The movie is available a couple of ways to view it. You can watch it for free through something called Canopy, K-A-N-O-P-Y. You can pay a small amount and watch it on, well, I think it's $7.50, so maybe that's not so small. But as I said to Daryl, none of us have gone to the movies in a really long time. So, and the movies were more expensive than $7.50 even when we did go. But on Vimeo, Vimeo.com. But Daryl has also very kindly offered to do 2 showings of the movie on this same Zoom link on Sunday evening at 7:30 p.m. starting promptly.
Yes, it's an hour and a half, the movie, and I'm going to start it. If you're late, you're just going to come in the middle. I'm not going to wait for anybody.
Right. So that's Sunday night, January 10th, and also Tuesday, January 12th in the afternoon at 2 p.m. Same thing. Promptly, she'll start it, and so those are free, obviously. So a number of opportunities, and I suppose even if you don't get a chance to see the movie, although I hope you do, it sounds like it should be a very interesting conversation by Jim and Jennifer, and I hope to see everybody there.
Yep.
Again, thank you very much, Levi. I really appreciate you
Pleasure.
doing this.
Yeah.
It was really my pleasure.
Great.
And for all of these topics that we brought up that were generated by the discussion, just remember we have a recording and it'll be on
yes.
the website. Okay. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night,
Good night,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.